begin by telling you about something that happened in the spring of 1968. It was a seminal moment in the war in Vietnam, and two young Marines were just outside Khe Sanh, where the fighting was intense. Both of these men had grown up just a few miles away from one another in Boston. One was from Southie, and one was from Quincy. Ed Kochanowski, this is Ed today, he was 18 years old, and he came from a broken home. And his best friend in his unit was a guy named Paul Grasso, who was 19 years old. He was from Quincy, which is known as Southie with trees. If you know, you know. He's the youngest of 5 children in a big, loving Italian family. And it turns out that Paul Grasso, not pictured, had passed up a spot to play for the New York Yankees to go to Vietnam. He enlisted. So these two men found each other. They became friends in Vietnam. They had each other's back. And so one day, in 1968, they're on patrol and they're fording a stream. They're going across a stream. And Kochanowski is lugging a huge pack of mortars on his back. And the strap breaks right when he's waist deep in the water. And so he's grasping at the strap to keep the mortars dry. And Grasso's right in front of him. He sees what's going on with his pal, and he says, "I'll help you." So he turns back, and he says to Kochanowski, "Hey, reach out, and I'll get you." And he can't reach that far with his hands, so he sticks out his M16. And Grasso grabs the M16, and he places his foot on the banks, and he starts to pull him up. And you know what happened. A shot rang out. Grasso fell, gravely wounded on the riverbank. The bullet ripped through his body, and he died right there, 20 days short of his 20th birthday. This man, Ed Kochanowski, was devastated. He said, "I wasn't as tough as I thought I was." It's important to be tough in Southie. "I took it hard. They had to take my weapon away. My grenades. They put me on a chopper and sent me back home." Well, while recovering in a military hospital outside Philadelphia, he got bad news from Vietnam. 5 of the other men in his unit had been killed in a firefight. So this man had survivor's guilt already, and it got worse. He was diagnosed with severe and chronic war neurosis, which we now call PTSD. The guilt, he said, felt like a heavy, wet blanket on his shoulders. His chest was always tight, sometimes making it hard to breathe. Even his legs felt heavy. And so he began drinking to make the pain go away. But that only made his depression worse. So not long after returning home, Kochanowski married. His wife apparently was wonderful, but he was not. He was consumed by booze and by guilt. He said, "I'd get drunk for 2 or 3 weeks, no food, no water. It was 10 to 12 years of that. I got into car accidents twice. They used the jaws of life on me." The guilt was functioning in Kochanowski's life as an anchor, but not the kind we've been talking about this weekend. He was being dragged down, the tragedy exerting this overwhelming pressure, consuming him, in fact, killing him. Now I want you to keep that in mind. We're going to return to him in a second, because it's not just tragedy that serves as an anchor in our lives. There's other things as well. But I wondered when I was thinking about this talk, why is it that we anchor our lives to things? And I think Hannah got at it earlier, and that life can feel so tenuous, so out of control, and so insane that we look for something, anything, to make us feel grounded, to keep us from drifting, keep us safe, and give us a substance that we often feel we lack. Have you ever felt like you might just sort of drift off into the ether? You don't know who you are? Well, I'll give you two examples of anchors that I see, one in my own life and then one I see in the culture before we get back to Kochanowski. For me, the greatest anchor that I've struggled with, and I think people in the church struggle with this a lot, but not just people in the church, but is the anchor of external validation. The anchor of external validation. It's very dangerous. Writing in Vox a couple of years ago, Ali Volpe said this. She said, "This profession I've chosen," and she's a writer. So to be anyone involved in a sort of a publicly creative thing, you are in this situation. She says, "It relies so heavily on attention and metrics that I often feel like a dog doing their best tricks, waiting for a treat. I could take this bad feeling and rationalize my insecurities away with proof that I'm doing just fine in life, or I could post a selfie to Instagram stories and hope for a few heart emojis. The latter option is almost always more satisfying in the short term." It's understandable that we crave and seek validation, signs that we matter, but that natural urge can warp into self-obsession, thanks in part to a culture that values validation as currency. All of life's milestones, good and bad, become bids for affirmation and validation. This is one of the great New Yorker cartoons, I think, of the last 10 years. It's a guy on a stage giving a seminar on overcoming the need for external validation, and the caption reads, "I can't hear you." It's great, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Anyone who's a writer, anyone who's a creative, an artist, anyone who gives sermons or even exists in the public eye knows that it's never enough. It's never enough. It becomes an anchor and it weighs you down and it drags you under. Another attempt, I think, one that I was reading about a bunch this week, I thought, well, gosh, this is going to feel a little mean-spirited, but why not? This isn't a sermon. I was thinking about techno-paganism. Anyone here know about Burning Man? Okay, it maybe feels like an easy target, but I think, oh, and that's only in the West Coast. It's not only in the West Coast. There's some of us that operate in these sort of wonderful little college enclaves where it sometimes feels like people's operating spirituality is anything but Christianity. Like anything. We will do this. We will do this thing with the robot in the desert before we will think about Jesus. One of my favorite writers, a guy named Sam Criss, wrote almost like a novella about his experience at Burning Man. I'm going to read you part of it, and hopefully you can forgive me or forgive him for this edge. He's talking about, he gets to Burning Man, he realizes it's nothing but Silicon Valley people there. And he says, one of the stereotypes about Silicon Valley that people like me love to console ourselves with is the idea that it's populated entirely by utilitarian drones who care only about productivity and efficiency. They live lives in homes with no art on the walls. All their clothes are black or gray. They eat protein paste for dinner. Meanwhile, we flatter ourselves with the notion that we're the ones who really care about the higher things, beauty and meaning and so on. He says the reality is much, much worse than that. These people are deeply spiritual. They are obsessed with meaning. These tech bros I met at Burning Man care about everything. They want to foster real, profound human connections. They want to form deep, nourishing, authentic communities. They want to plumb their own consciousness through every spiritual or pharmacological avenue there is. They have an intense fascination with the idea of myth and ritual, the acts and archetypes that draw people together. They will give seminar after seminar on storytelling and life as narrative art. They're constantly inventing new religions. They're searching for a mission, some purpose to give structure to their lives. All their friendships need to have an explicit purpose. The problem, of course, is that everything these guys actually do is totally contrary to everything they want. The world they built is one in which school playgrounds are eerily silent. Children scattered like dead flies on the tarmac, staring blankly at their phones. You can order a person off an app to drive you around or bring you pizza or clean your house, and once it's done, you can give them a rating and never encounter them again. Alongside the world we all inhabit, they've created a synthetic, over-engineered version of the one we've lost. These people, and by the end of the essay, he realizes he's one of them, had melted down every great esoteric tradition, Tantra and Gnosticism and shamanism and Neoplatonism and Kabbalah, all rotted into this mystical slop at the end of history, whose final message is that there's nothing except yourself, no mysteries except your own, and the universe exists to help you achieve your goals. Maybe that's a cheap shot. He wrote literally 50,000 words about his experience there. Now, I can relate, because I like The Iron Giant, the movie, the kids' movie. I like robots. I like the cute ones that we saw in Batteries Not Included. I like big robots. This is cool to me. So I understand the appeal. I'm not above this, but I am concerned about it as a person who is suspicious of his own desires. For Christians, we learn, though, that our anchor is not so much an idea or a movement, but a person. This is why I think this is my favorite Anchorman. This is from Arrested Development. If you don't know it, look it up. Bananas Flambe, Who Done It? It's a great show. I was thinking about the term Anchorman, though. Where does it come from? It originates not from the news. It originates from sports, specifically relay races, where the final runner is the anchor, the most important member of the team. The term was then adopted by early television news to describe the lead anchor of a broadcast, a role that provides stability and is the final point of connection for viewers, with early uses sort of beginning in the 40s and 50s. Provides stability and is the final point of connection for viewers, the most important member. But in this case, on broadcast TV, the anchorman's job is not simply to provide connection, but to what? To report the news, to break the news. And it maps so beautifully onto Christianity, where we see not an anchor of guilt, not an anchor of techno-paganism or external validation, but we see an anchor man, Jesus Christ, who has come to deliver news. With the news that you are not left to your own devices. You are not left to your own cities you're constructing in the desert of your life. You are not left to your own devices, and guilt, no matter how egregious, does not have to be definitive. This is the great news that our anchor man breaks. Paul puts it like this. Oh, no, not that one. Shoot. Okay. I did the Hebrews verse 2. And I was like, once Sam made the joke, I couldn't go there again. In 1 Corinthians, Paul says this: "So then about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and from whom we live. And there is one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live." What does this have to do with Ed Kochanowski? Well, after his first marriage ended, Kochanowski met a woman named Dottie at the Polish-American Citizens Club. They married, and she was the love of his life, and yet he almost threw it away because what happened in Vietnam kept gnawing at him. That anchor kept dragging him down. Just as his life seemed to be in a death spiral, though, something happened. He talked to God. He said, "Lord, if you're there, I've been looking for you a long time." He found a passage in the Bible where Jesus talked to a Pharisee named Nicodemus. Nicodemus went to Jesus looking for wisdom or redemption, or maybe just the comfort in knowing that there was more to this life than just what we experience on earth. "Very truly I tell you," Jesus told Nicodemus, "no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." Kochanowski says that in that moment, in a dream that didn't seem like a dream, he felt a rush of wind and was born again. He began reading more about the phenomenon and learned that his mother's name, Renata, is derived from the Latin Renatus, which means born again. He discovered that his surname, Kochanowski, means to love in Polish. Being interviewed 45 years after the fact, he says, "That was 45 years ago. I got right with God and Jesus, and I got right with my family. I put my marriage back together. My kids warmed up to me. If it wasn't for Jesus, I would have died a long time ago." What about the other people in this story? What about the Grassos? Their lives had also had an anchor in it, but it wasn't an anchor of guilt. It was an anchor of grief. Their pain was compounded by the dearth of information from the Marines and the government about the circumstances surrounding Paul Grasso's death. Paul's older brother Ray is interviewed about this story, and he says, "That lack of closure became its own kind of pain. I carried it through my whole life like a weight strapped to my back. The grief never faded, it just got quieter." Well, on the first Memorial Day after Paul was killed, Kochanowski guessed correctly that the Grasso family would go to his grave. And so he went to the cemetery too, but he lingered in the distance. He couldn't bring himself to approach them. Another time, a few years later, when they were dedicating a memorial to Paul Grasso in Quincy, Kochanowski went to the cemetery. He stood in the crowd again, trying to summon the courage to approach the Grassos, but he just couldn't do it. The guilt was eating him up, but he couldn't take those last steps and make that awkward introduction and throw himself at the mercy of the Grasso family. He couldn't get there on his own. He couldn't go there. He couldn't take the step he knew he needed to take. The anchor was too heavy for him. Fortunately, what he didn't maybe realize at the time, but the God he had come to know in Jesus wasn't a God who required him to deal with his own anger. It wasn't a God who required him to be bold or courageous. It was the same God that Martin Scorsese can't stop making movies about. Now, Amanda talked about silence earlier today, and we didn't coordinate this. But Apple TV just ran a 5-part miniseries on Martin Scorsese, and it's fascinating if you're a film fan, if you're just interested in America. We learned that Martin Scorsese grew up in Little Italy, and he was transfixed by the beauty of the church, of the Catholic Church, and he went to seminary. But he got kicked out because of his fixation on the movies. And the seminary never left him. It runs through every single film of his. Faith has been an anchor, and sometimes it has dragged him down. If you remember the 1980s when he directed The Last Temptation of Christ, the whole world lost its mind. It was about as serious a demonstration against a movie as could possibly be imagined, and he was portrayed as the devil incarnate himself. Martin, he told someone at the time, "Why did you make this movie, The Last Temptation of Christ?" And he answered them, actually, this is so funny. He was talking to the head of his studio, who was a Jewish guy, and he said, "Do you really need to make this movie? Why do you need to make The Last Temptation of Christ?" He said, "Well, I want to get to know Jesus better." The guy had no idea what to do with that. It turns out faith, though, has been the anchor throughout this man's entire life and artistic work. Jesus Christ has been his anchorman, the ultimate and lasting, consistent point of connection. Such that when Leo DiCaprio blessed him with all this success after his career had tanked, Leo said, I want to be in every single one of your movies going forward. And that meant that they could get funding. And so finally, when Martin got the chance to make a movie that he wanted to make, he decided he wanted to make the adaptation of Silence, this Japanese book about missionaries in Japan. Now, the reason he was drawn to this, I'm going to show you a clip from the documentary, is because in Silence, the Jesus that's encountered there is one who breaks character with God, the God that is so often understood by us instinctually in the deserts of our lives that we construct. Here's what happened to Martin Scorsese.
After I had done Last Temptation of Christ, I had to go deeper. I read Silence. And September of '89, I said, I've got to make this. It's a true story about the 17th century in southern Japan, where there was a great conflict between Catholic missionaries and the Japanese government, resulting in maybe 35,000 martyrs, people killed ultimately. And I was interested in the way that some of the main missionaries that went there originally apostatized, which meant that they gave up their religion.
If you don't apostatize, the prisoners will be hung over the pit. Until you do, their lives bleeding away, drop by drop.
Silence, more than just about like any film, wrestles with the question of what it truly means to be Christian.
As long as you don't apostatize, they cannot be saved.
Our main character, who is very arrogant, insisted he would never apostatize. But he did it to save other people. It's the only Christ-like gesture that character makes in the entire film, is to apostatize.
Here's a story where a guy, by the end of the story, denies the Christianity he is preaching. And in so doing, he finds the real Christianity. So what is that?
It's also the loss of his pride, isn't it?
The whole key is ultimately humility. That's the learning of humility. That's the beauty of that story.
One thing that I think is really notable about the film is the epilogue between the priest and Kikijiro, who's this wretch.
He does terrible things. He's a traitor, right? And selfish.
What?
This guy keeps doing the same thing over and over again, you know? Keeps wanting to be out there and to be a Christian, and then rats on everybody, including the priest.
I am sorry for being so weak.
I think Marty identifies with Kichijiro more than with the other characters in the film.
Mi padre, take away the sin.
And Jesus said, you know, why should I be hanging out with the high priests and everybody? They're all fine. The ones who really need the help are the sinners.
You see it in Mean Streets, you see it in Raging Bull, you see it in Goodfellas, and then I think it reaches a sort of apogee with Silence, of extending that kind of sympathy on such a wretched person.
Kichijiro, he's the one who teaches. Because by the end, it's almost as if Jesus works through him to teach Rodriguez of what love really is, and forgiveness and compassion.
Do you still think of yourself as a Christian?
Yes, I think so. I really believe so, yeah. I had to reject it, find it, reject it again, try to find it, and then finally find some kind of comfort with it. I think we all have doubt, fear, but by the time you understand your faith, you'll be dead.
Wow, right? Oh my gosh. When I say that the Anchorman breaks character, what I mean is that Jesus in this film doesn't work through the church. He works through the sinners. Furthermore, the great through line, the anchor of Scorsese's work, is not a shameful exposure of the underbelly, but sympathy with the wretch with whom he identifies. This is an anchorman at the heart of our faith, who breaks not only news, but breaks character over and over and over again. And yet that is not all the Anchorman breaks. This is not just an idea about God. This Anchorman breaks chains, too. This past summer, Ray Grasso, Paul's brother, his daughter Amy borrowed his car, his van, to move house. The van got dented while they were going between houses, and Amy felt bad, so she offered to pay for the repairs. She told her dad to bring the van to Chuck Ayer's auto body shop in North Quincy. Ray Grasso made the short drive to get a quote, handing his registration over to the guy behind the counter. And that guy, Ed Kuchanowski, recognized the name immediately. Kuchanowski drew a breath and swallowed hard before addressing Ray Grasso. "Did you have a brother who was a Marine that was killed in Vietnam?" he asked. Taken aback, Ray Grasso replied almost in a whisper, "Yes. I think we need to step outside," Kuchanowski said. Grasso wondered what the guy behind the counter wanted, what was going on. Outside, Kuchanowski looked at him and said simply, "It was me. I'm the one." Ray Grasso understood immediately. Both men began sobbing, folding into each other. Anchors clattering to the ground. After a bit, Grasso pulled back and said to Kuchanowski, "I want you to know I hold nothing against you. We never blamed you. Never." After it was out there in the open for everyone to appreciate, for everyone to digest, so much became clearer. Ray Grasso said, "After hearing Ed's heartfelt words, I knew one thing. This man didn't need any more punishment. He needed peace." And the Grassos gave him that in spades. The weight those men carried, one for not knowing what had happened, the other for knowing, disappeared into the ether. There they are at Paul's grave last month. 57 years it took of resistance. But the broken Anchorman persisted. Kuchanowski is now an adopted member of the Grasso family, the kind he wished for when he was a boy. He's a frequent guest at their home, where Ray's wife, Susan, fusses over him. Their daughter, Tara, cuts his hair. Susan Grasso said, "Kuchanowski coming into their lives has closed a circle, put an end to something that had eaten away at their family. He gave them a gift, explaining how Paul died as he lived, selflessly, trying to help someone who needed it, someone who was carrying a weight that was falling down. He wanted to help shoulder it." For his part, Kuchanowski said that the continuing and loving embrace of the Grasso family has healed him, has ended his war and finished an odyssey that began when a clueless kid from Southie was sent off to a foreign land. That's the Anchorman who breaks not just news, not just character, but breaks chains as well. He was more powerful than the burdens these men carried, and he was more powerful than their attempt to run away from those burdens. Our broken Anchorman made this man whole, not just with sympathy, but with forgiveness and miraculous, divinely ordained freedom. That is what we're trying to talk about when we say we're anchored by grace. Thanks for listening, everyone.